Alright, in this video I'm going to replace the injection pump on this 2003 VW Jetta TDI diesel with the 1.9 liter ALH diesel. This was the last year of the cars with this single injection pump, feeding all 4 cylinders before they went to the individual pumps on each cylinder. So this is a manual transmission car, which means this is a 10 millimeter pump. Okay, I'm looking at doing some performance upgrades on this car, including a bigger turbo, injector nozzles, a tune, etc. So the first thing to do here to get the performance that I want to get is to swap out the factory 10 millimeter pump for this bad boy over here, which is from an automatic transmission car with what they call an 11 millimeter pump. This will flow more fuel and help feed the bigger injectors and the bigger turbo. All right, the first thing we're going to do to access our pump is basically get rid of the things that are in the way, right? So the intake tube here that comes from the intercooler down there into the intake, we'll get rid of all this. That'll give us access to our timing belt cover here, this plastic cover here that will come off, which will give us access to the timing belt, which of course goes around the pulley running the injection pump. Later, we'll take the valve cover off, and we need to take the valve cover off so that we can ensure that the number 1 cylinder right here is at top dead center when we do the pump swap. The vacuum pump here at the end, the other end, has to come off as well. We'll talk about that one later. And of course later the injection pump lines here that go to the injectors will have to come off. But I'm going to leave that till later. I don't want to introduce any dirt into the pump or the lines or the injectors right now. Same thing with the valve cover. We'll leave it on as long as possible. So we'll get started removing some of the stuff that's in the way. All right, the intake tube down there has 2 clamps on it, both of which are inaccessible without, I think, taking the headlight out. But I think just pulling this back will give us enough room to get this cover off. So there's 1, 2, 3, and then there's 1 down here, which is hard to get. And 1 more difficult to reach one down here on the front. Now, with any luck, this will come out right there, like that. Good. Let's set that aside. All right, before we take this apart, make sure it's running perfectly, and it is. It's running great with the old 10 millimeter pump. Check the VCDS here. So the fuel temp is supposed to be 110. It's just about warmed up when you do this test. Okay, 110. $101 right now. And block 2, which is the start of injection, it's the timing, is supposed to be at 70, around 70. TDI timing here in the bottom right. Now you got to select the engine. This is the ALH 1.9, did a ALH after 1999. Okay. So there's our timing there. The green line is advanced, the red line's retarded, the blue line's kind of right in the middle. The actual timing is the yellow line there, jumping up and down. So it's kind of right on the bottom edge of the retarded line. So it's right at the bottom edge of the spec. When we set the new pump, we'll set it more near the middle somewhere. But this car runs great, gets good fuel economy, has good power. So it's just wanted to check before we do anything where things were before we started. Alright, get these glow plug terminals out of the way. I'm going to mark these. Sharpie is your friend here. I'm just going to mark this one as 1. Let's mark it as 1 here. 1 up here. This one here will be 2. Obviously 2, the middle one. Let's mark it here as well. 1, 2. And then the third one I'm not going to mark. That's number 3. Get this vacuum ball out of the way too. It's an 8mm bolt here. All right, now we'll move over here to the vacuum pump. There's a little vacuum line fitting here. So there's 3 bolts holding the vacuum pump on. One here, 13mm. One here, which is also 13mm, but there's a 10mm stud on it, which these brackets attach to. You'll need an offset 10mm wrench to get at it, unless you do something like this. Let's move this bracket out of the way. That'll allow us, with that thing out of the way, to get just a standard 10mm wrench on there, pull that off, so then we can access the 13mm bolt. And then on the back here, there's a similar little bracket for the vacuum line clip there, and then a 13mm bolt. So 1, 2, 3 bolts to get out, and then the vacuum pump will come off. Okay, now we can just use a 13mm, use a socket. You won't be able to fit a socket on there, so I'm just going to use a 13mm wrench. And you can reach all 3 with a 13mm like that. And here. There's a seal there you want to just be careful you don't lose. Just tuck that to the side. Okay, now the valve cover. There are Allen bolts holding the valve cover on. They're 5mm. To get these two back ones, you need one of these little wobbly, kind of tapered bits, because you can't go straight in. You got to go at a bit of an angle for that one, and the one by the EGR is on a bit of an angle. I use a standard one on all of the rest of the bolts because these things can be really tight and they're easy to strip. So I used a straight in one, pushing down hard. I've loosened them already because they can be a real pain. These two you're taking your chances with on the back here because you're at a bit of an angle. All you can do really is push down, try and get it as straight as possible, and just give it steady pressure, and hopefully they break loose for you without stripping the heads. If you strip these heads, then you're in trouble because you have to find some kind of an extractor or something to be able to get the bolt out. Maybe you can get vice grips on these front ones. These back ones are difficult. Just go slow and really take your time with these, because a 5-minute job can turn into a 5-hour job pretty easily. The valve cover can come off. This thing's in the way. All right, now we're going to rotate the motor to top dead center on the #1 cylinder. There's this special tool here, which we can turn the camshaft pulley with. Now, here's where you tell me that you're not supposed to do this. The proper way to do this is to go from the crankshaft. There's a 19mm bolt on the crankshaft that is probably the better way to turn the motor over. It's not really accessible. You need to take the wheel off and the inner splash guard off, which is a pain. I just put a brand new splash guard on this thing. I don't want to do that. So I'm going to turn it on the camshaft pulley here, clockwise only. You have to turn these motors clockwise. And I'm just going to be careful. Again, you can tell me how bad this is to do this. I don't really care, this is how I'm doing it. And we're going to turn this around. Now you can see the valves opening. There's this lobe here on this valve. I don't know whether that's the intake or the exhaust valve. I think it's the intake. And you can see it's just about to push the valve open. This one's open right now. You can see this lobe's pointing down. So we want it to be, so both valves are closed. We'll keep turning this, because when both valves are closed, and our timing mark, which we'll show next, is at top dead center, we know that the #1 piston is on the compression stroke, so it'll be at the top, and both valves are closed, so it's the compression stroke, and that's where we want to stop, because that's where we're going to pin the pump, and then we'll take it out and put the new pump in, leave everything locked the same so nothing moves, and then the new pump will be timed approximately correctly, and we can fine tune it on the VCDS tool. All right. Both camshaft lobes are pointed up now, kind of like some people say, like in a V kind of shape. That means that the cam's not pushing down on the valve, on the lifters. So the valves are closed. So we should be pretty close to top dead center now. Now we'll check the timing mark. Okay. This is a manual transmission car, of course. Look down here on the top of the transmission. See, there's a little rubber plug here. Pull that plug out. There's the plug. And that then allows us to see. You can see the teeth on the flywheel down there. There's a tool, it's called a cam locking plate, that has a groove in it, and I've already slid it in. there's a groove in the end of the camshaft. There's a little slot here that slides in. When the engine's at top dead center, number one's at top dead center, the groove is horizontal, so that's another check for top dead center. That should be horizontal. I've had to move the motor a little bit just so this tool pops in. It's just shimmed with business cards here. And that's where we want it to be locked. The next steps are to start removing the fuel lines. So there's 17 millimeter nuts on the injectors, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 4 17s on the pump as well. So stuff some rags down here because some fuel can leak. Loosen off and also clean the fittings here with brake cleaner. This motor is very clean, so I didn't have to worry about that, but just back the 17 millimeter nuts off. You can leave the brackets together so they come off in pairs of 2, and then just set those aside somewhere clean. Then we'll take these fuel lines off here as well. There's one line that connects under there. This one here, pull the clamp back. Again, you might get some spillage here. Not too bad. And this line here. A little bit of spillage there. Okay, with the camshaft locked, and take this timing belt off. Again, my camera battery died, so I've slipped the belt off. Let me just show you what I did real quick. Okay, now down there, you can see this pulley here is the tensioner pulley. There's a 13 millimeter nut there that's loosened off. You don't take it all the way off, just loosen it. And then there's this special TDI tool that has these little tabs on it that go into, there's one there and there's one further down. I've cranked it right down. And with the nut loosened, you turn this pulley counterclockwise, which loosens the tension on the timing belt. And then later, when we put the belt back on, we turn the pulley clockwise, which puts the tension back on, and then torque the 13 millimeter nut back. So the tension's off the belt, obviously. The belt is off the camshaft and our injection pump pulley. And now with our fuel lines off, we can proceed with removing the pump. Okay, now with these fuel lines kind of out of the way, just hold the center nut on the pump. I don't have the right size wrench, so I'll just use a crescent wrench. And then there's 3 bolts to remove the pulley, 13 millimeter bolts to remove the pulley on the pump. There's 1, and 2, and 3, and then the pulley will come off. Okay, now we can proceed with removing the pump. So there's, well, first of all, the electrical plug is here. Just pull straight up on this. They can be a bit sticky. Like that. And then there's a little tab there and that pump unplugs. There's a mounting bracket here, a 13 millimeter bolt there. Use a socket or just a wrench. Loosen that off. And then around the other side of the pump, there are 3 mounting bolts that mount the pump. Again, 13 millimeter. So we'll loosen those off and then the pump will come out. Should be enough room to get a socket in here. But I have a wrench in my hand, so why not? Not too tight. Okay, we'll pull these 3 bolts out, and then the pump should come off. Just kind of rotate it out. It's a bit of a puzzle. Kind of gotta get it through the whole little hole there, and then twist it around. Careful of the dipstick, it's kind of in the way. There, just like that. And there's the old 10mm pump out. Now to store this, I'm going to fill it up with a power service with a diesel treatment and cap all these lines. All right. When I pulled the caps off the new 11mm pump, there's a bunch of gunk in the outlet ports here. I don't know if you can see it, it's like gelled diesel fuel because this thing's been sitting for a while. I'm worried that gelled gunk is all throughout the pump. I cleaned up the ports here with some Q-tips and they look clean now, but I don't know what's going on inside the pump, and I really don't want to start taking things apart because this was a good working pump before. I'm going to run some diesel fuel. I've rigged up a funnel here into the inlet of the pump. I've got my Mighty Vac here connected to one of the injector lines here. And what I'm going to do is cap off all the other places so no air can get in. Fill this with diesel fuel, fill the funnel with diesel fuel, and just draw a vacuum. You can see I've already put some fuel in here. You can see the Mighty Vac as I pump it. It's drawing fuel through the pump. So I'm going to do that in each of the 4 lines here and just run maybe a cup full of fuel through each of the lines just to maybe get rid of some of the worst of it. And hopefully flush out the worst of the gunk so we don't end up with clogged injectors later. Okay, I'm going to put the back bolt in first, actually, just to kind of hold it in place, and then we'll put the 3 front ones in. Okay, we'll put the pulley back on. I'm going to use the pulley that was on the car. It looks like it's in a bit better shape, and I just feel that it's, I don't know if it matters, probably doesn't matter, but it's obviously been on there and spinning with this timing belt and the other pulleys. It's matched to this timing belt, so I'm going to just use the old pulley as opposed to the one that came with my used injection pump. Put that on there. Come on, you get on there. There we go. Just Slide that on like that. And the 3 13mm bolts we will install in the holes. And remember, there's a adjustment on those bolts. So we'll just tighten the bolts so they're just loose enough that we can move the pulley around so that we can move it back and forth for one. Okay, and we'll set the pin in the injection pump. I'm gonna have to just rotate the injection pump a little bit, just on the front nut here. You can double check it using a mirror, just so you can kind of see down there where it's at. Make sure it's all the way in. Yeah, it's all the way in. So that pump is now locked, and those bolts are loose, so there's lots of play there. So we'll leave it in the middle for the timing adjustment later. Or rather, when we tension the timing belt pulley, we'll want the pulleys to be able to move a little bit. And then once the timing belt's on later and tensioned, then we'll tighten the bolts. Okay, now we're ready to put this all back together and get the timing belt back on. So the first thing we need to do is we need to pull the camshaft sprocket off. So there's a 19mm nut. You can use a socket or a wrench. I've got a socket on here. And you need to counter hold the camshaft or the sprocket with your tool, so you're not putting torque on the alignment tool at the other end. We want to just break free this 19mm nut so that we can start removing the camshaft pulley or sprocket. Now we won't remove this bolt, but we're going to back it off because we're going to use a puller to pull the sprocket off. So the instructions that I have is to remove this bolt about 3 turns. You just want a little bit of a space there so that we can pull the pulley off. Remove this. Now this is a Metal Nerd tool, a cam sprocket puller for 99 to 2003 TDI. You can see it's got little teeth there to bite onto the sprocket and back the they call it a jack screw, I think, or a jack bolt. Back that off, and you just fit those little teeth into the biting into the pulley nicely. There. And then we can turn the jack screw into the bolt. So I only have one 19mm wrench and I can't find it. I'm using a 3/4 just to counter hold the cam sprocket bolt, and I'll just use a crescent wrench on this end. I know it's a bit shady tree here to doing it this way, but that's okay. So we'll start tightening up the center bolt here, and it's pushing against our other center bolt. And eventually it breaks free like that without it coming flying off, because we've left that bolt partially in there, but it's loose now so it can spin. It's important to do this because when we tension the timing belt, we need this sprocket free to move a little bit, as well as the injection pump sprocket to move a little bit as we put tension on the belt. And then once the belt's tensioned back up and everything's ready to go, we tighten this back up and then tighten the injection pump sprocket screws. Okay. To get the belt, even with everything loose like this, it's still really hard to get the belt onto this sprocket without taking it off. So really you have to back this out all the way. Put the sprocket around the belt. That goes under that pulley, goes there. And then squeeze this guy and then you can get the bolt back in. Tighten the bolt just finger tight and then back it off just a little bit because we want this pulley to be able to move when we do the tensioning. All right, now we'll tension the belt up with our tool. There's an alignment mark. All right, and we'll tighten our camshaft sprocket bolt. And I'll put the torque settings for all these bolts in the comments section below. Camshaft lock tool is still in place. Injection pump pin is still in place. Belt is tensioned. So basically now what we do is we'll take the camshaft lock out, we'll take the injection pump lock out, and we'll rotate the belt by hand using our sprocket tool, 2 complete revolutions of the engine clockwise, just to make sure the belt's seated properly and evened itself out. All right, all the pins are out. We'll rotate this motor clockwise, 2 rotations. Okay, before we start working around these injectors, these open injectors, I'm just going to take a rubber glove here, like a little thin rubber glove, cut the fingers off, and just use these caps to cap off the injectors. I just don't want to get any pieces of dirt or anything in there. Okay, the valve cover can go back on. And the vacuum pump. Okay, time to hook the pump up. Hook the fuel supply line up here. Make sure that's nice and clean. I'm going to use a vacuum pump to prime the pump. Now, I watched a guy on YouTube who seemed to know what he was doing. He was a real mechanic. Say you can't prime through the metal tube that was there before, so I've taken it off. He says you got to prime through this thing. So I've got a little, the Mighty Vac comes with these pretty cool little adapters, which should seal into there pretty good. And I'm going to pull fuel into the pump. That didn't take long. So that pump should be pretty much full right now. All right, let's crank it over and see if some fuel comes out of these delivery valves here. The little rubber cap there, it was leaking out of there. I got rags stuffed all over the place. We'll see if see what happens. Let's see if that cap blows off. See if we can see fuel coming out of these valves. I'm gonna go crank it over. Okay, looks like we have fuel flow coming out of these valves at some point, so it's time to put the injectors back, the injector lines back on, and see what happens. See if this thing will fire. Those two there. Yeah, and then those two, yeah, back here. Okay. There we go. All right. Well, it's running. Okay, I'm gonna wipe some of this diesel up, open the door, and see if we can run this thing for a little bit and see how it runs. Well, it's settled into a decent idle pretty quick. I think the air's out of the lines now. Make sure. You can also tell if there's a dead cylinder. If you open this up and it doesn't make a difference to the idle, then that cylinder's not contributing. I think each one fell off as soon as I opened this. Let's try this one again. I can't remember. Yeah, you can see the engine starts to run rough, and that means that that cylinder is contributing. And I know that they are because this thing's running very smoothly. We'll take it for a drive, make sure everything's okay. That's how we change the pump. This one appears to be working. I'll check for leaks, but I'm pretty happy. I wasn't sure with all the gunk in there whether it was going to come back to life, but so far so good. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for more videos on this car as I look to upgrade the turbo, look to upgrade the tune, the injector nozzles, and a whole bunch of other stuff. Thanks for watching. Okay, I checked the timing. It was way advanced, so that's fine. It was enough to get it started. It's close enough to start it. So we need to loosen the 3 injection pump sprocket bolts here, the 13mm bolts. Just loosen them a little bit. And then on the big nut here, on the front of the pump, we're gonna turn that counterclockwise a little bit, because what that'll do is that slides the pump backwards. The engine rotates clockwise, right? So if we loosen the sprocket and turn the whole pump shaft a little bit counterclockwise, that's because the pump rotates clockwise, right? That's gonna retard the timing a little bit, right? That relative to the engine, if the pump's turned back a little bit, it's a little bit further behind from where it was then. So we got to turn it back a little bit so it's starting injection just a little bit sooner, which should retard that timing because it's way advanced. It's off the chart now on VCDS. If you are retarded on VCDS, then you would need to loosen these pump sprocket bolts and turn the big nut on the front, which is the shaft of the pump, clockwise a little bit to advance, to bring forward that injection timing so it starts a little bit sooner. Okay, so you got to play with it. It might take a few tries, and once we get in the range of the 2 lines on VCDS, we can tighten up the bolts and put the cover back on, and we're done. All right, VCDS measuring blocks. Come on, open. We don't have time for this. Go. Switch to basic settings. TDI timing. it's cold. It's too cold to do this properly, but I'm just trying to get a good good starting point here. ALH after 99. Well, we're getting there. We were way off the scales before. Now we're right at the top of the chart there, so we're just at the edge of the tolerance for advanced timing. I think what I'll do is I'll bring it back just a little bit so that it's closer to the blue line, and we'll call it a day. Okay, thanks for watching, everyone. This thing's running great. Like, comment, subscribe, give it a big thumbs up if you learned something in this video. But so far so good. It looks like our 11mm injection pump is working after sitting for about 5 years and being all gunky. I don't see any leaks, and this thing's running like a sewing machine. Thanks for watching.